Lycia's story isn't about the empire, but about surviving against all odds. While the Hittite kingdom was building roads and armies, and Mycenae was sending a fleet to Troy, the Lycians remained free. They did not create a world power, nor did they wage grand conquests, but they managed to survive the catastrophe that destroyed the entire ancient world. Their lands were far from the centers of power, but always at the center of events: pirate raids, secret alliances, and sudden betrayals. The Egyptians feared them, the Hittites hated them, and the Greeks respected them, calling their land Apollo's homeland. Who were they really? Barbarians, heroes, or cunning survivors of the Bronze Age? Hello friends, you're on the Amazing History channel, where the past comes alive without boredom or textbooks. Today our focus is on Lycia, the free land that lived by its own ways, rules, and wrote its own version of history. If you enjoy learning about forgotten civilizations, wild times, and bold rulers, you're in the right place. Thank you to everyone who supports the channel through sponsorship. It's thanks to you that we can create such deep and unconventional episodes. Well, enough with the sentimentality. We're heading to Bronze Age, to the place where the Lycians walked their path, no matter what. On the map of the Bronze Age, Lycia looked as an inaccessible corner of southwestern Anatolia, full of rocks, forests, sea, and few direct roads. But it was in this corner that an amazing mix of peoples, languages, and myths came together. Not an empire, not a kingdom, but a free, albeit wild confederation. Later, Lycians referred to themselves as Tremili, people of Tremis, in their own inscriptions. However, during Bronze Age's time, their name was different. For the Hittites and Egyptians, this was Luca, and for the Greeks, it was Lukioi. The word Lycia is a Greek adaptation of a foreign name, which the Greeks either heard from their neighbors or invented themselves. Most likely, it comes from the Hittite Luca. This was the name for a region of independent coastal tribes who lived outside the control of the great powers. The Greeks adapted this name to their own pronunciation, and later it became part of Roman geography as Lycia. The name Tremis itself was lost in stone inscriptions and became known only to archaeologists, but in ancient chronicles it was the name given from outside that stuck. In archaeology, ancient texts distinguish three indigenous ethnic groups, from which the Lycians probably emerged. Solima, the earliest pre-Indo-European inhabitants, likely aborigines of Melius, and Indo-Europeans related to the Carians. It is said that they were the ones who brought the languages and new customs. Termile. According to the Greek version, immigrants from Crete are connected with the mythical Sarpedon, an ally of the Trojans. Perhaps these were not three different waves, but three names for one people who changed over centuries and adopted foreign customs. The essence stayed the same, living apart by their own rules. They had no king. Instead, dozens of autonomous communities each had a chief or elders.
Decisions were made at the council. No power pyramid, only horizontal connections and personal agreements.
The Lycian language is a branch of the Anatolian land, related to Luwian and Carian. Essentially, it is one of the last representatives of the pre-Hittite culture in Anatolia that survived into antiquity. Interestingly, the Lycians considered Apollo to be their own. Some Greeks even claimed that he was born in Lycia, not on Delos. This is how the Lycians wrote themselves into someone else's mythology without being distracted from their own. By the 15th century before Christ, Lycia was already a collection of independent cities and communities, united by language, customs, and staunch resistance to foreign rule. They had not yet entered the world stage, but they were already ready to play the big game. During the Bronze Age, Western Anatolia was the scene of a prolonged confrontation. The Hittite kingdom advanced from the east, while the Mycenaeans infiltrated from the west. Most of the local kingdoms were drawn into the struggle for spheres of influence, but Lycia, as before, lived on its own terms. The Hittites called this land the lands of Luca and first mentioned it at the end of the 15th century before Christ, in the context of the Western Anatolian coalition known as Assuwa, an alliance of about 20 states that opposed the Hittite elite expansions. Luca was most likely part of it, but after the defeat, it remained independent, without vassal status, but also without open hostility. Unlike their neighbors, the Lycians rarely acted head-on. They preferred strategic maneuvering between empires and adapting to the current balance of power. But sometimes they had to make a choice. One of the most complicated and revealing episodes of that era is connected with a man named Maduvata, a Hittite commander who played his own game. At first, he was appointed by the Hittites as the ruler of one of the border regions, but soon he tried to act independently. He came under attack from the Mycenaeans and was exiled. The Hittites gave him refuge, restored his power, and sent him back as their own appointee with the task of pacifying the cities sympathetic to the Mycenaean side, including Telos and Hindua, where loyalty to the Hittites was clearly lacking. From then on, everything went off plan. Instead of attacking Telos, Maduvata entered into negotiations with the local chiefs. He revealed the route of the Hittite army to them and suggested playing it differently, to lure the enemy into a trap. That's exactly what happened. The Lycians ambushed the Hittites, who were attacked and defeated. It wasn't just a defeat, it was a sign that the Hittites were losing control over western Anatolia. As a result, the political map of the region changed. The Hittites' main enemy, Arzawa, an ally of the Mycenaeans, grew stronger, and Lycia, although not openly declaring itself the victor, played a key role. They waited for the right moment, betrayed their powerful neighbor, and stayed on the sidelines as if nothing had happened. That's real survival tactics in the world of empires. But while some were building empires, the Lycians were strengthening their reputation as unpredictable and dangerous players. They could support the Hittites if it was profitable, but easily switch to the Achaean side when things heated up. By the late 14th century before Christ, their influence reached beyond Anatolia. Egyptian archives, especially the Amarna letters, note a pharaoh's complaint to the ruler of Lycia about Lycian pirates. In the Bronze Age, Lycia referred to Cyprus. In his reply, the Cypriot king tells the Egyptians that if his subjects joined the raids, he was unaware and tries to justify himself. He also confirms that the Luca people, or Lycians, frequently raid villages even within Lycia. This was not war, but a system. The Lycians acted as free agents in a complex international network where the same city could raid an ally, then make a trade agreement with them, and after that accept help from an enemy. By early 13th century before Christ, the Lycians, lacking central authority, already acted as a mobile force confident on land and sea, not just as tribes or mountain communities. Their cities were located by rocky bays and coastal terraces, where it was easier to hide from an army or conceal a ship than to negotiate with the envoys. This was frustrating for the empire, but nothing could be changed by force. Their raids were not chaotic. It was the logic of actions on the borders of civilization, without diplomatic obligations, but with a clear understanding of where more could be taken. They chose targets that could not retaliate, weak settlements, vulnerable areas, coastlines, trade routes that had long become a feeding ground for everyone except the Lycians themselves. As the Hittites regained strength in the east and Egypt became involved in Levant conflicts, the Luca people expanded their operations. Mentions of them appear in Syrian sources, in Cypriot ones, even in Egyptian temple inscriptions. These were not expeditions in the sense of going out to sea and robbing, but rather a system of economic pressure. If a neighboring state was strong enough, they traded with it. If it weakened, they took directly from it. If it posed a threat, they temporarily made an alliance with its armies enemy. While others thought about borders, Lycia focused on access to movable goods like grain, copper, captives, and textiles. They didn't need control over territories. It was enough to control the routes. This behavior made Lycia unique, not a kingdom or a fleet in the modern sense. But at the same time, it was a factor that had to be taken into account. The Lycians did not strive for conquests, but they regularly disrupted the stability of others, which made them noticeable. No one could say for sure where the next Lycian action would take place, but everyone knew it would happen. In the 13th century before Christ, even the most powerful states began to falter. The Hittite Empire, restored after a temporary decline under Suppiluliuma I and his son Mursili II, began to expand again. It absorbed and conquered its neighbors, including cities that may have been located on the border of Luca. But the Lycians once again did what they did best. They chose flexibility over resistance. Hittite texts from this period mention friendly cities in Lucca that became vassals or allies. This doesn't mean that all of Lycia submitted. Rather, some cities temporarily sided with the Hittites to avoid pillaging, while others continued to keep their distance. It made no sense for Lycia to participate directly in the big game. Its cities adapted to the map, which changed every decade. By 1274 before Christ, the situation had reached its peak. Egypt, under the command of Ramesses II and the Hittites, led by Muwatallis II, clashed in the great battle of Kadesh. The Egyptian list of Hittite allies also named the Lycians, but this alliance was more a facade than a genuine partnership. Just a couple of decades later, part of Lycia would find itself on the other side of the conflict, now as a victim of a new enemy of the empire. The most unpredictable enemy of the Hittites during this period was a man named Piamaradu. Who he really was is still not fully known. Some saw him as an exiled aristocrat, others as a rebellious leader, and some as a tool for others. But in Hittite texts, he is described as one of the most dangerous enemies, seeking to completely drive out their influence from western Anatolia. Piamaradu did not act alone. The Mycenaeans stood behind him, perhaps unofficially. They supplied him with ships, weapons, and money, and in turn, he incited rebellions, started uprisings, and crushed the Hittite allies. One of Piamaradu's victims was the city of Atarima, probably located near Lycia and connected to the Hittites. It was completely destroyed, which showed how fragile the former alliances had become. It was a demonstrative act of intimidation. For Lycia, everything that happened turned into a disaster. In some cities, councils supported the rebels, while in others, they sought help from the Hittites or Mycenaeans, hoping for protection from their neighbors. Old alliances fell apart, and a chaotic struggle of everyone against everyone began, where each city survived in its own way. The empires tried to intervene. The Hittites sent envoys, troops, and threats. The Egyptians sent letters, but nothing worked anymore. Western Anatolia plunged into anarchy. Piamaradu wasn't building a state. He was sowing chaos, burning loyal cities, cutting off supplies, and destroying treaties. His name is mentioned with concern in Hittite chronicles under 3 different kings in a row. He was active for at least 30 years. At that time, Lycia was constantly shifting, today under attack, tomorrow in alliance, then in neutrality, and so on in a cycle. By the beginning of the 12th century before Christ, the Mediterranean resembled an overheated furnace. Tension was rising from all sides. The Hittites, Mycenaeans, Ugarit, even Great Egypt. All were drawn into a series of disasters that historians would later call the Bronze Age collapse. The Lycians once again did not stay on the sidelines, but this time played by their own rules. They entered history as part of the famous coalition of the Sea Peoples, a poorly understood but formidable force that descended upon the eastern Mediterranean. In Egyptian inscriptions from the time of Ramses II and Merneptah, the names of the participants are listed: Akawash, Teresh, Shardana, Shekelesh, and Lucca, all the same Lycians. Around 1208 before Christ, the Lycians, as part of the Sea Peoples coalition, participated in an attack on Egypt. Together with the Libyan tribes, they attacked the western Nile Delta. Pharaoh Merneptah was able to repel the attack as described in his inscription at Karnak. It was a victory, but not a turning point. The attackers continued their actions in the following decades. At the same time, another conflict broke out in the north of the Aegean region, which would later become legendary as the Trojan War. According to a Greek epic, the Lycians, led by King Sarpedon, fought on the side of Troy. They were not among the main heroes, but the name Sarpedon is mentioned in the Iliad as often as the names of the Greek kings. He fell by the hand of Patroclus, and his army was destroyed. It's historically hard to prove if Lycia literally took part in this war. But archaeology shows that Troy was indeed destroyed around 1180 before Christ, in the same years as the Hittite capital and the cities of mainland Greece. The world was collapsing, Hatassah was burned and abandoned, Pylos, Tiryns, and Mycenae were destroyed, Ugarit disappeared, trade stopped, and diplomacy died. Cities and palaces that dominated sea and land for centuries vanished within 1 or 2 generations. But Lycia survived. It didn't survive because of fortresses or a strong army. It survived because it never built fragile empires. Its cities were autonomous, flexible, and mobile. They had no ambition to rule their neighbors. While others enforced central authority, the Lycians maintained their traditional way of life. Communities, councils, local leaders, adaptation, and the habit of not expecting help from anyone. They experienced the collapse of the world like a change of season, not without losses but without panic or collapse. With the transition to the Iron Age, Lycia did not disappear, but changed gradually. In the 8th to 6th centuries before Christ, it reappears on the historical stage, now as part of the world of Greek poleis, Persian satrapies, and Hellenistic kingdoms. However, its structure, language, and some beliefs have been preserved. Moreover, it was during this era that inscriptions in the Lycian language appeared, thanks to which we know their self-designation. The Lycians did not leave behind palaces, but rock-cut tombs carved into the cliffs. These are documents carved in stone, where we can see their language, their rulers, their conflicts. They were part of the Hellenistic world, but they did not dissolve into it. Under Roman rule, Lycia kept special status as part of the province of Lycia and Pamphylia, but still had some self-government. The Lycians did not build pyramids or roads thousands of miles long. They did not leave behind an empire, but they left something more important, a lesson in surviving outside the system. While others tried to control, they chose to negotiate. While some fought for the throne, they were strengthening their communities, and when everything around collapsed, they simply remained. The history of Lycia is the story of those who are often forgotten in school textbooks, but who have been preserved in stone, in language, and in the logic of survival. If today you feel that the world is unstable, remember the Lycians. They also lived in an age of anxiety and handled it perfectly. Thank you for watching until the end. If you appreciate stories that are rarely told, subscribe, like, and support the channel. See you.